Hi everyone, welcome to Jawaras. Let's continue our discussion of Spring IOC container and beans. In this video, we are going to talk about dependency injection. We are going to see various ways in which we can inject dependencies into a bean. I already created a project. So the name of the project is Spring Core 03 dependency injection, and I have updated the pom.xml to use Java version 17. And I've created a Spring Code 03 dependency injection class inside main package. If we run it, it is working. So now we can go ahead and add the dependency for Spring context. Since that has all the interfaces and classes in order to work with Spring IOC container. So let's do that. I will say dependencies, dependency, group ID will be org.spring framework. The artifact ID will be Spring context. And then we need to specify version here. What we will do is we will create a variable called spring.version here, and its value will be 6.0.11. And here in the version we can specify this variable here, spring.version. So you can search for spring context maven repository, and you will find this code for adding the dependency. So you don't need to memorize anything here. Now that is done. So now there are three ways in which we can inject dependencies. One is using setter methods, second is using constructor arguments, and third is using factory method arguments. So now first of all, let's see how to inject dependencies using setter methods. So we will create a XML file, but before that, let's reload the Maven changes. Now we can go to resources, new XML configuration file, and Spring config. And I will give it a name beans. Let's say setter. Let's create Java class called author service inside services package. Services dot author service. And let's create one more Java class inside repositories. Repositories author repository. And inside services package, let's create one more class called email service. Now let's say that author service depends on author repository and email service. So private author repository, private email service. So since these are private properties, in order to set these properties, we need setters. So let's create that. Set author repository and set email service. Now let's go to the main method. Let's create an instance of application context. Application context will be new class path XML application context, since we will define the metadata configuration inside an XML file, and that XML file is beans setter.xml. Beans setter.xml. Okay. So this is the first way to inject using setter methods. Now let's access author service from context. So what we can do is author service. Author service will be context dot get bean. Its type will be author service. And let's access author repository and email service as well. The repository equal to context dot get bean author repository dot class. And similarly, email service email service will be context dot get bean email service dot class. And let's print everything. So first author service, then author repository, then email service. And let's rerun the app. And we will get this error: no qualifying bean of type services dot author service available, because we have not configured that yet. In the bean setter.xml, let's create a bean of uh, type author service, and this author service needs two objects of type author repository and email service. So let's create those beans first. Bean, we can give id author repository and class repositories dot author repository. Let's create another bean. id will be email service and class will be services dot email service. So we have created these two beans, and these two beans don't need any dependency. So we are good here. Now here, let's specify property. We can do property name will be author repository, and this author repository property should have a reference to a bean of type repositories dot author repository, and we can use this id here. What we can do is we can say ref and then bean author repository. So what we are doing here is that we are telling Spring IOC container to call set author repository method. What it will do is it will call set author repository method with this bean. So it will pass this bean here. That means the bean created from this configuration will be passed here. There is also simpler way to do that. What we can do is we can say property name, and here only we can specify the ref attribute. So the we are injecting author repository using ref element, and we are injecting email service using ref attribute. And not only ref, we can use value as well. So let's say in the author service we have an string private string number of authors. Let's create a setter method for that. And in the bean setter.xml, what we can do is property name will be number of authors, and its value can be like, let's say 20. Or what we can do is we can do this as well here, value 20. So both of these will work. So if you hover here, we can see usage of explicit value element, and we get suggestion to replace value element with value attribute. If we do that, then it takes us back to the previous configuration. So if we run the app, okay. Now let's do one thing in the author service, create a toString method. So we will know whether we are getting the same author repository email service or not. So this is author service, and this is author repository, which is have 68267DA0, and which is same as this author repository. And email service is also same as this email service which Spring container has. And we can see number of authors as well, which is 20 here. Now instead of string, this can be, let's say, int as well. So if we make it int, so we need to make this int as well. but here it will work. So the Spring will convert this value, this string to integer. If we run it again, you can see it's working fine. Okay. Now let's look at the another way to inject the dependencies, which is using constructor arguments. So go to author service and we will remove all these setters. Let's comment out everything here. Now again, let's create these three fields: private, final, author repository, author repository, private, final, email service, private, final, int, number of authors. And let's create add constructor parameters all. Okay. So now these objects or these beans will be injected into author service using constructor arguments. We can see we are this constructor will take these three beans or these two beans and one integer value as constructor argument. Now let's see how to do that. So in the resources, let's create a new XML configuration file, spring config, and give it a name, beans constructor.xml. So we will work here, and in the main method, instead of bean setter, now we will use bean constructor. Beans constructor will have the configuration to inject beans using constructor parameters. If we run it now, it will fail because we have not done any configuration inside this XML file. Let's do that. So first, let's create two beans of type author repository and email service. So we can copy paste the code. And now let's create a bean of class author service. Now we can see we are getting one error here, that no matching constructor found in class author service, because the, there is only one constructor in author service and which takes three arguments, but we have not given any argument to the constructor. That's why we are getting this error. Now let's see how to provide constructor arguments. For that, it's just similar to property. Instead of property, we need to specify constructor org. Constructor org. Since the type of these constructor arguments is different, so this is author repository, this is email service, and this is integer. So we can pass these in any order. So let's say first I can pass value, let's say 30, and let's say then I want to pass the email service, and then I can pass the author repository. This will work. So we rerun the app. It's working fine. Since there is no mismatch or no ambiguity between the type of constructor parameters, we can pass in any order. Now, if let's say there are some parameters which has some common ancestor in their type hierarchy. So if the Spring is unable to resolve that, then we need to specify the index. So here we can specify the index. So index will start from 0. So this author repository has index 0, email service has index 1, and number of authors has index 2. So we can pass the index here, and index would be accurate. So it will be index 2 because this is the last argument, and this is index 1, and this is index 0. And if we run it again, it will work fine. But let's say if instead of 2, if you pass 0 here and let's say 2 here, then it won't work. So you will get some error because type mismatch error, because this has type repositories dot author repository, but the type at index 2 should be integer. So it won't be able to convert author repository to integer, and it will give type mismatch error. So that's the thing which you need to keep in mind. Now what you can do is, instead of index, because let's say later you might add some more fields, and then you let's say you don't want to keep track of index, like you may what you can do is, later you can place email service before author repository, or let's say you may remove one parameter from the constructor. In that case, all the indexes will be changed, and in that case you need to change those indexes here as well. You will need to remember, or you need to keep track, you will get errors. So like there are many things can go wrong if you use index. What you can do is you can use name instead. If you use name, you can say this is number of authors, and you can use name here as well. And let's say it is email service, and let's name here, and it is author repository. We run it again. It will work fine, but you can see we are getting a warning. We are getting this warning using deprecated debug fallback for parameter name resolution. So this constructor parameter name resolution will only work in debug mode. But obviously we don't run our application in debug mode on production. We can use one annotation here which is called constructor properties. And we can specify the name of these properties in the same order. So let's say author repository we can call author repository, then email service, and then authors. And if we run it again, now we are not getting that warning. Now let's say we don't necessarily need to specify the same name with as the variable name. We can specify, let's say, email service. And if we run it again, then we will get an error, because here we are specifying name as email service, and but it doesn't have any email service here. It has email hyphen service. So if we use email hyphen service here, it should work. It is working. Now again, what you can do is, instead of using ref attribute, you can use ref element as well. Here, a ref, and bean will be service, and rerun the app, and it is working. So that was the second method how we inject properties into a bean using constructor parameters. Now there is another way in which you can inject properties, and that is using static factory method parameters. So let's go to author service again, and now let's comment out this code, and let's create those instance variables again. So first will be private author repository, private email service, private, and number of authors. And as you know, for static factory method, we need an static instance of author service. So private static final author service instance will be new author service, and we will make the constructor private so that no class other than this class can call that constructor. Let's say private author service. One of this constructor is private, so we cannot call this constructor from outside of this class. That means we cannot create object of this class from outside of this class. So let's create a method here. So that will be public and it will return author service. Okay, create instance. It will just return the instance. Now let's say it will take three things. One is author repository, then it will take email service, then it will take number of authors. And what we want to do is instance dot author repository will be author repository, instance dot email service will be email service, instance dot number of authors will be number of authors. And we can use or we can call this method to get instance of author service. So let's do that. So if we run it now, it won't work because we are using bean constructor, and here we are specifying that create a bean of type author service with these constructor arguments, but uh, there is no constructor which takes these three arguments in author service class. And also we have made the default constructor also as private, so that constructor can also can't be accessed from outside of that class. So what we can do is let's create a new XML configuration file, spring config, and this time give it a name like beans factory.xml, and let's copy these two bean definitions and put it here. Now in order to create bean using static factory method, we can use bean, then type of the class, because this is a static factory method, so we need to tell which class contains that factory method, and that is inside services.author service, and then factory method which is create instance. In the author service we have, yeah, but this method should be static method, and then we can close these two definitions, create instance. Now we are getting error because this method takes three things as parameters: author repository, email service, and number of authors, but we have not provided any parameter here, and we provide these parameters same as we provided in the constructor. So we can just copy these from here and it will work fine. Let's copy these and paste them here, but this will be email service. So email service, we run it again. Okay, it won't work because in the main method we are specifying beans constructor, but it's only beans factory, and rerun. This is working fine as you can see here, but now we are getting a warning because this will work only in debug mode. We cannot use name here, and we cannot specify the constructor properties here because this is not a constructor. What we need to do is either we can remove these, so it will work. So let's remove these names from here and run it again. So it will work because it will resolve. And if there are multiple reference to the same type, there are multiple parameters of the same type, then we can use index here. So let's use index 2 here because this is the third parameter, and if I rerun it, it is working fine. So that's the third way of injecting the beans. Now we can also inject the properties using instance factor method. So that will be same as this one only. So what you can do is in the previous videos I have shown how to use instance factor method, and that returns a bean of another type. So you can combine that mechanism and this mechanism to pass additional parameters to the factory method. So you can take that as practice assignment and you can try that. So that will work fine. So that is it for this video. I will meet you in the next video. Until then, keep learning. Bye.